Today I'm going to be introducing Rick Brimacomb. Rick began advising and investing in early stage and emerging companies as a venture capitalist in 1991. Rick is the founder of Club Entrepreneur, and prior to that he covered and worked in early stage companies as a research analyst and investment banker. For over 2 decades, Rick has helped numerous companies develop into investment grade opportunities, attract funding, and create shareholder value. In 2005, Rick founded his own advisory practice, Brimacomb & Associates, where he assists business leaders in refining strategies, assembling resources, and securing funding. Rick joined Sherpa Partners in 1998 and co-founded Sherpa Trek Venture Capital Fund in 2001. He is an advisor to several early-stage companies, founder of Club Entrepreneur, and past president of the Minnesota Venture Capital Association. Rick's going to come up and going to be introducing Todd Colten.
Thank you. Yep, thanks, Rick. Yep. So first of all, thank you very much for coming today. It's very exciting to be here and to be supporting Craig and doing this. For those of you who I didn't talk to before the session, I started a club entrepreneur at the Minneapolis Club in Minneapolis in 2007. And the first year or so, there were like, I don't know, 5, maybe 10 people on a good meeting. And usually about half of those people were there because I twisted their arm and said they had to come. I had a speaker and I said, you have to come because I need enough people to have a reasonable turnout. Anyway, so my group has grown over the years. Sometimes I'll get as many as 130, 140 people now. And about a year ago, somebody said, hey, why don't you bring this Club Entrepreneur platform to other markets? And so I started a Club Entrepreneur in St. Paul this fall. And then back in June, I knew you had the club up here, and I'd been to Duluth, but I hadn't been to the Kitchi before. And so I drove up, and the sun was shining, and it was a fabulous June day. And I walked into the club, and I knew we had to have a Club Entrepreneur up here as well. It's a fabulous facility, good people, wonderful location, and it just felt right to me. So then I asked the folks at the club, I said, hey, who would be a good person to lead the group? And they mentioned Craig. And over the last couple of months, Craig and I have been kind of gearing up for today and what Craig will be doing going forward with the group. Craig is off to a great start. He's doing a fabulous job. You're going to get a lot of value from this group over the upcoming months and years. And so thank you, Craig, for putting this together. Thank you for the Kitchi for co-hosting it with us. And thank you all for taking the time to be here. So the Club Entrepreneur platform, back when I was at Sherpa Partners, a venture capital fund that I co-founded, we put our CEOs together and our C-suites together, and we did little kind of lunch and learns, and I saw the value in people interacting with one another. And so my idea in doing Club Entrepreneur was to get business people together, get them talking, have some what I call actionable content, so provide content that is something that would be of benefit to them and the audience. And then in picking the Minneapolis Club, when you have it at a fabulous facility with good food, you can't go wrong. So good content, good people, good food, good facilities. So anyway, again, thank you all for coming today. I handed a few of these cards out. If anybody would like one, see me. It steers folks towards the Club Entrepreneur website, which is a pretty easy one to remember, Club E for entrepreneur.com, clube.com. Craig also has set up a LinkedIn group. It's Club Entrepreneur Duluth. My LinkedIn group is Club Entrepreneur Minneapolis. There's also Club Entrepreneur St. Paul. My group now in Minneapolis, we have about 1,700 people in the LinkedIn group, so the network is quite large and the interaction is very positive and favorable. So I would encourage you all to join Craig's group, the LinkedIn Duluth group, and then likewise you can give Craig a business card and he can add you to the database. So anyway, so enough about Club Entrepreneur. As Craig mentioned, I've been in the venture capital industry for a lot of years. Been around long enough to see some cycles both go up and go down and then up and go down. Anyway, so seen enough interesting things happen over the years. And when I saw the drone category start to emerge a couple of years ago, is something that I had a personal interest in and felt like we would, as a couple people said, including Mark Phillips, which, by the way, thank you again for joining us today. As Mark said, there is a drone economy, not only now, but there's a big one coming. And so last fall, Todd Colten, who's our speaker today, called me. Todd had a business that was inside of a larger company, and they were wanting to spin it out and have kind of a pure play drone business, which in the investment world, if you're inside of a larger company, you kind of get, washed over a little bit and not as much attention, and economically trying to make money, you need to be out and on your own 2 feet. So Todd reached out to me last fall. We had a couple of months of getting to know one another. Todd actually spoke at a panel I had last January. And then Todd and his team spun out of the business that they were in. I helped them organize their thoughts and pull that together and raise financing. And I'm involved with the company and am doing a variety of different things to help them move forward and create shareholder value. Graham Thickens, actually Graham, give us a wave. Graham is also from Minneapolis, so Todd and Graham and I drove up this morning, and Graham is helping out with PR communications and marketing at the company. And so when I looked at Sentera and why I was interested is not only is the industry happening, but if you ask folks how long they've been involved with the drone business, usually the answer is 1 or 2 years. Well, Todd and a core group of 6 engineers have been in the industry for 15 years, going all the way back to Lockheed Martin. And now the engineering team is about 17 people or so, and they have over 200 years of industry experience. So one of the things that I was most interested in what they were doing was the industry experience. They had been actually out in the market, solving problems, getting paid, and in this world where there's things just starting to happen, the fact that they had revenue, had customer experience, and had this fabulous team were a couple of things that were most interesting to me. And now it doesn't help that they raised $5 million and have money in the bank to go do some things. So it's an exciting story. And when I was talking to Craig about who we should have for our kickoff speaker, right now I couldn't think of a better industry or anything more interesting what's going on than the drone business, drone industry, and Sentera in particular. It's the most substantial pure play in the state of Minnesota, and we probably have to go quite far to find a company that's also raised $5 million in the category. So anyway, with that, I'm going to introduce Todd Colten. Todd is the Chief Aerospace Engineer, and as I mentioned, he's been in the industry for about 15 years now, one of a core group of people that formed Sentera, and you're going to hear a lot about Sentera in the future, but before we hear about them in the future, we're going to hear from Todd today. Todd Colten.
All right, thanks, Rick, and thanks, Craig. It's an honor to be here at the inaugural Club E meeting in Duluth. As Rick mentioned, I've been to a couple of his events in Minneapolis this past year, and I found them to be really useful, really interesting. Meet lots of different people that I wouldn't have imagined. I spent the first chunk of my career working for big aerospace companies or Fortune 500 companies. And so networking really involved, basically being around, you're hanging out inside the company. So now that I'm off on doing small company work, getting out and doing real networking and meeting all sorts of people from different industries with different companies off doing their own thing, trying to make a go of it. It's real interesting. It's new. I like it a lot. So thanks for having me here. Thank you all for coming out and listening to me. So I'll tell you a little bit about Sentera. So Sentera is a Minnesota-based startup, but we're building on an accomplished legacy of people and products. And we're developing sensors, software, and drones. And in particular, we're doing it for commercial applications. So a little bit more about that. Rick mentioned the core group of engineers that I've been working with. It's been an honor and it's been a privilege for me to work with the same group of folks for some of them going back 15 years when I first started my career out of college. And we started doing unmanned aircraft, or UAVs is what we called them at the time. Now they're called drones. Back at Lockheed, we kind of, inside a big giant company, started a little mini company, a little mini basement project, and grew that into a real program, and took some of that technology and have moved it on to a couple other companies since. Earlier this year, we kind of had an opportunity where we could acquire some of that core intellectual property, some of that some of those designs and some of those products and go off on our own and start a new company. And so that's what we did. So we started up Sentera earlier this year and kind of hit the ground running, and we're off to the races now. And it's been a wild ride for the past 6 months for sure. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'll talk more about Sentera and what we're doing. I'll give kind of a drone history lesson, just general interest, kind of what are these drone things that everybody's been hearing about the last 2 years and where they come from, and then kind of wrap up with where are we today and what are the uses for these things, especially from our perspective, which is more what are some of the industrial uses or what are some of the industrial applications versus just going out and taking some awesome video of Split Rock Lighthouse, which is also a cool thing to do, but there's other uses too. So, and before I jump into that, I brought a couple drones. I brought two. One that we designed and built, which is this, which was called the Phoenix. It's a small electric hand-launched airplane. So this is what it is. It's 3 pounds, and this is called a Phantom, a Dji Phantom. This happens to be a Phantom 2, but they're on the Phantom 3 now. So what Sentera is doing is a combination of designing and building our own aircraft, and in areas where there's already better ones on the market, we just go and buy these, and we'll value add, we'll package specialized cameras or sensors or software with them to do a specific job, whether that was agriculture scouting or cell phone tower inspection or different industrial uses. If people got questions, you can come up. Oh, the other reason I brought both of these. So this is an example of 2 different types. And we're talking about small unmanned aircraft, right? These are hand-launched things. This is an airplane. This is what is a quadcopter, right? And so these two fill very different niches. An airplane is going to fly like a regular airplane does, and typically can cover more ground faster. So for agriculture, it's a really good tool, especially if you're trying to map a big area. These quadcopters are, this is what you see on the news for drones. These are vertical takeoff and land. They're very easy to use and fly. They'll sit there. Both of these have got GPS on board, but this one will just sit there and hover in place. If you put the controller down or walk away, it'll just sit there and not move or not do anything until it runs out of battery, in which case it'll come in and land before it actually gets to empty. So they're 2 different tools, but they're used for different purposes. We also do a series, and if people are interested in our cameras, we do these really specialized cameras that are used for industrial applications too, that we actually will mount on these different drones. So that was the first 2. The Phoenix and the Phantom are those 2 drones. We also do another earlier version of the Phoenix called the Vireo, an Indigo and Spire. Indigo's another. Those are more quadcopters, and we're an OEM supplier of either the cameras or sometimes the drone aircraft to other companies. So, and from a B2B thing, if they're going to go resell it or do something else.
Hey, Todd.
Yeah.
Talk just for a minute about how long they stay up in the air and how fast they fly.
Yeah. Okay. So something like this, a Phantom. This will fly for about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at the most. But most of these quadcopters you can think of as being a 15-minute flight time, and they'll fly maybe a few hundred feet away. You have to be able to see them. You can't go too far away, otherwise you'll lose link and you lose. It will fly back to you. You'll lose control, but it automatically flies back to you. And typically you'll be flying this at 400 feet or below, and this will go maybe 10, 20 miles an hour. You could maybe get going faster if you really haul, but typically you're going to be doing more of a hover around and take pictures of things is what you're going to use that type of platform for. The Phoenix flies a bit faster, so this will go 35 miles an hour. It'll fly for more than an hour, 70 minutes typically. And if we're using it in an aerial mapping application, whether it's agriculture or something else, or maybe just flying down a long straight path like a railroad or a power line or a pipeline, it's going to it's going to cover a lot more ground faster. So that's also the two different use cases on why you'd have different types of drones for different uses. We kind of talked about this, but the people at Sentera we come from Lockheed Martin, United Technologies, which is a large Fortune 20 company, and we've got some people from Target too. So we're taking a legacy of developing drones and this type of aerospace technology, but also some on the consumer side of things and on the product side of things from some other big name companies. We're FAA approved to operate drones. I don't talk about it much in the presentation, but if people have questions, we'll happy to talk about it too. But the FAA is definitely involved in terms of regulations and what's allowed and what isn't allowed and what will be allowed in the future to operate these type of aircraft in the airspace on a commercial basis. Between all of us in the company, of which there's about 20 people now or so, more than 20,000 hours of flight time with small unmanned aircraft. So we've got lots of experience, and most of that was done 15 minutes or 20 minutes at a time. So that's a lot of hours if you add it all up. So in less than 2 years, now Sentera's only been up and running for about a year or a little less, but this same aircraft and these cameras, like I said, we had an opportunity to take over that property. So we were actually, the earlier versions of them last year as well, took 15 million photos. That's a lot of photos. You think of your cell phone and how many pictures you can fit on your cell phone. It fills up after a few hundred or so. Our cameras took 15 million photos, primarily of corn and soybeans and other agricultural uses. We mapped 24,000 square miles, which is larger than most small states, and 12,000 flight hours on these aircraft. Lots of gigabytes of data. So the question is, the next thing after you think of those big numbers, what do you do with all that data? And I'm going to come back to that later. But that's an important question, because it's the drones are here. Okay, what are the cool things you can do with them? Well, then what? What do you do with once you've taken all these pictures? Now what do you do? Okay. So this was everybody's idea of a drone 3 years ago, right? In fact, the term drone was kind of coined or pushed by the media over the last, say, 5 to 10 years. So 3 years ago, it was all about drone strikes in some, hot and dry country halfway around the world. Now, everybody's idea of a drone is this. So that you see this, that looks real similar to, that's a Dji Phantom. And so this is around with a GoPro, going to the beach or, tooling around the park or your backyard or something, and posting your video to YouTube. So that's what everybody's idea of a drone is today. What Sentera is doing is we're taking that technology and trying to find commercial applications for it in agriculture, in inspection, like infrastructure inspection and inspecting other things, construction or other projects, and then safety. And then safety, that could be disaster response, first responders, law enforcement. A lot of us come out of the military world developing drones for the military, so that there's still a lot of the products and expertise we have applies to those markets as well. So we have some of our specialized cameras or payloads or other things we are selling to those markets. In agriculture, you're going to take these specialized cameras and you're going to put them on a drone, for example, this Phoenix, this aircraft, fly it over a field, and you end up getting, it's probably hard to see, and I'll show you some more later, but you end up getting these really specialized images of the plants. And it doesn't look, you'll take pictures of what we call RGB or regular color imagery, and that's useful, everybody can see that, but we'll also take pictures in different wavelengths of light that the human eye can't see. And plants will look different in different wavelengths of light, in particular in the infrared spectrum, which is, you start to think of infrared like the old Schwarzenegger movie Predator, right? They got Predator vision where the guy sees heat, the alien does. So that's the idea. You can see heat in the plants, and you sort of take the plant's temperature. So when plants are unhealthy or they're stressed or something's going wrong, they typically heat up, just like humans do. So that's what we're doing. You can fly over, you can map a whole field, and you can find areas where there might be drought stress or there might be some other stress going on that causes the plants to heat up. In safety is a little bit different. It's not about mapping. It's about real-time video, live live situational awareness to an activity that's going on. So it's more of a real-time thing. Inspection is kind of an intersection of both those use cases. Inspection, you're going to go take a lot of photographs of something, but you're going to be doing it in a similar way that you might do with safety, where you'll show up. It might be a vertical takeoff and landing type platform. You might be shooting video, or you might be flying with a live video link to go take and inspect certain areas and then take pictures and save that for historical data. The other thing that Sentera does is, for these different use cases, we develop software to help you make sense of all that data. So what are you going to, and again, getting back to the question of what are you going to do with all these pictures once you've taken them? Our 15 million photos, 24 100,000 square miles of mapped area. That's a lot of data. So what do you do with it? So I'll come back again on that later, but that's a big part of, if you're going to do this for a commercial application and especially scale it, you've got to deal with the flood of data. Okay, so here this is the history lesson. So the slides have got a little bit different background color, so you know it's like that old sepia tone type of thing. So the first drone ever, most people don't know this, don't have any clue. Was developed in Dayton, Ohio. It was called the Kettering Bug in 1918. So almost 100 years ago, we've had drones going all the way back. And so it was a radio-controlled aircraft that they called an aerial torpedo. So it was on the tail end of World War I. They developed this. You can see it's a biplane, kind of like a World War I aircraft. It's on rails. It takes off. It would fly to a target, and they could steer it with a radio control all the way back then. That was only 15 years after the Wright brothers' first flight. So there was a lot of exciting things going on 100 years ago in aviation. There's a lot of parallels to what's going on now in the drone industry. I mean, in the industry, we always liken it back to the Wright brothers' time because of how fast technology is developing with these small little drones. So it goes all the way back then. In World War II, they started experimenting with pigeon-guided bombs and that type of thing. So where they actually, the pigeon was an autopilot, and the pigeon would poke around and try to. They had a little view screen, and somehow the pigeon could see where the city was or whatever the target, and it would poke around and try to hit the spot. And it sort of steered it, and it worked sort of, not really, but they were working on it. So in the 60s, this is the Lockheed E21 drone. Some people maybe have heard of this, or you've seen this picture, maybe not. Most people have never seen this thing. This was, if you've know what the SR-71 Blackbird was, that really fast biplane from back in the 60s. This was a even more super top secret project back then, where they took and they developed a drone aircraft, no pilot on board, and it could fly even faster, I mean ridiculous speeds, like Mach 4 type of stuff, over Russia and China and all these things in terms of doing aerial imagery. So it had film canisters on board. Once it would get on the other side of the country, it was overflying. They would dump the canisters, they'd go pick them up, or they'd go recover the drone from the sea or wherever. So, I mean, this was, nobody knew about this it was totally classified, top secret for 30 years. Nobody knew that we had this type of technology back in the 60s, but we did. It was small, there wasn't many of them, but they were doing it. In the 70s, there was something called Firebee. Again, this wasn't widely known, but this was used in Vietnam a fair amount, and it was a drone. It would fly a pre-programmed waypoint over, and it was a big challenge to try to get it to not overfly neighboring countries and all this stuff. In the 80s, there was something called the X drone. So here they're starting to experiment with smaller, cheaper. It's tough to tell scale, but you can see that's grass underneath there. So this was maybe a 100-pound delta wing airplane that maybe a 10-foot wingspan or less. And they started. These were used in Afghanistan and in the 80s when the Russians were there, and some other stuff. In the first Gulf War, some of this technology was used. After the Gulf War, kind of in the 90s, the military really started to look at drones, or UAVs as they were starting to be called, as the wave of the future. So, in fact, the upper left corner there is something called Outrider that was designed and built in Minnesota. A lot of people don't know that, but it was actually, the airframe was built in Duluth, and a lot of the inside and guts were designed down in the Twin Cities. That project, defense budgets being cut in the 90s eventually went away, but there were some others too. So this is where a lot of this technology really came into its own. And a lot of it was big, large military UAVs. In the late 90s, something special happened. So a confluence of technologies kind of came together, and they created the first kind of big revolution in the drone industries, or in the technology. And that was, you wouldn't think of it, but car engine sensors, GPS might be obvious, and cell phones. So what about car engine sensors? So if you think about when your cars started to get smart, in the 90s or so, they started to put sensors all over your car. Your car now has got hundreds of computers on board, but that really kind of started in the late 90s. ABS brakes, all this type of stuff. So little small, cheap sensors, whether it's accelerometers or just other types of sensors that you might need for a robot, started to be mass produced. So that's important. GPS, everybody knows what GPS is because everyone's got one in their pocket now. But in the late 90s, there was something called selective availability. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but back then, GPS was around and you could buy Garmin's, that type of stuff, but they were jammed. Basically, the U.S. government who controls the GPS satellites still does. It's the Department of Defense. They would introduce some errors into the signals so that you knew roughly where you were within 100 feet or a couple hundred feet, but you never knew exactly where you were. In the late 90s, they turned that off. They said, hey, everybody, you're getting the full GPS signal. And that suddenly GPSs became very useful, and everybody started to buy them. And then cell phones, obviously, everybody knows what cell phones are, but you think about it, small processors, small cameras, small lightweight batteries, all these things kind of came together around that time and allowed kind of a real revolution in small UAVs. So, again, this is like billions of dollars, Department of Defense stuff, big, lots of cool technology, but big and expensive. Suddenly, less than 10 years later, small handheld glorified RC airplanes that have got GPSs on board, all sorts of automotive grade sensors and processors, batteries that came out of cell phones, and then obviously we got into a couple kind of messy wars that suddenly there was a big need. There was a lot of drivers for pushing this technology along. You look at these pictures and you look at the uniforms that everybody's wearing in these pictures. None of them are Air Force uniforms, right? This is all pushed by the Army and the Marines, because the Air Force said, we like our big expensive airplanes, thank you very much. The Marines and the Army said, hey, we think this is a really useful tool. We've got some new applications for this. They embraced it. So that decade was really pushed by, and every year it was something new. So we're talking about a real acceleration in the development of that technology. So now we're in the 2010s, or the teens, so where are we today? So now, like a lot of technologies, drones are beginning to commercialize. So it's coming out of what was originally a military technology, now it's getting out into the commercial sector. So lots of things like, let's say, the internet, computers in general, all sorts of technologies that we take for granted today were originally military technologies in some form or another, made its way into the commercial market, and then changed into things that nobody could have ever imagined 10 years ago. So that's what's happening in the drone industry now. This is a chart that in the drone industry, everybody knows this chart very well. AUVSI is the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. It's the big trade organization for our industry. In 2012, which is when this chart was made, the wars were winding down and were pretty much over, kind of, at that point. But so everyone said, okay, what's next? Well, what's next? This technology is naturally going to commercialize, right, in the industry. It hadn't happened yet, but we said, okay, it's going to. And so the trade organization, AUVSI, came out with this chart. And on the vertical axis is number of UAS, drones, UAVs, UAS. It's all kind of the same thing, unmanned aircraft systems or unmanned aerial vehicles. The number of UAV sales on the vertical axis, and then years across the bottom. So, and there's a few different commercial sections here. The big red chunk is agriculture. The blue sliver in the middle is public safety, and the green sliver along the bottom is other. So everybody thought agriculture was going to be the big giant market for this type of technology. And they thought by the year 2020, 5 years from now, it would have been 7 or 8 years from when this chart was made, it's going to be a $2 billion commercial industry, a commercial market. So this is what's actually happening 3 years later, right? So you see that the chart at the bottom I squished way down, right? That was the number of drone sales that they predicted would happen in 2015 and 16, which is where it starts to ramp up. So we're like we're 10 times more than what they predicted 3 years ago in terms of the size of the market, in terms of the number of drones that have been sold in the commercial market. It's mind-blowing. And this is why you're hearing about it in the news all the time, because it's and the technology is advancing along with it. So we're up, by the end of this year, there'll be 1 million drones sold worldwide just this year in 2015. And a lot of those are going to be these quadcopters like this. So this you can pick up for $1,500 GPS on board, fully autonomous, self-guided. You fly it with your smartphone. It's got a really awesome camera on it that's better than a GoPro. It's cool stuff. So that's what's happening. And the punchline at the bottom. So it's going to be $2 billion this year, right? Not 2020. It's like $2 billion now, 3 years later. So it's big. So what are we doing to get a piece of that? A lot of this is being driven. Oh, so I made my little line here is green. That's the other, right? The little sliver at the bottom is other. Turns out the other was the million drones being sold worldwide because of the whole idea of a consumer drone industry, consumer drones. The idea that anybody could go buy one of these and go take awesome video and photography of the North Shore or somewhere where they're allowed to go fly for fun. So Sentera's not doing that. We're not doing the consumer stuff. We're focused on industrial applications. That's the niche that we're going to try to focus on, a little bit more high value, a little bit more specific. So in agriculture, we're looking at building crop health maps with those specialized cameras I talked about before. Crop insurance is a big piece of it. If anybody knows anything about agriculture, crop insurance is a major piece of the economics. And so after a hailstorm or after an event, being able to go fly over, get a image of like, this is exactly what happened in the event, and then the estimators can go estimate how much insurance to issue or not. And quick crop scouting is another big thing. Right now, as crops are growing up, farmers will hire scouts, and they'll drive down in a pickup truck or a four-wheeler, and they'll just buzz by a farm field, and they'll look out the window and they'll say, "Yep, growing pretty good." And they call on their cell phone back to Farmer Bob and say, "Yeah, this field's growing good. Oh, I see a bunch of standing water in this other field." Once there's not a lot of corn up here, but you don't have to go too far south, and you start seeing a lot of corn. And corn grows really tall these days. I mean, they'll get up like 15 feet tall in July, and so you can't see into a cornfield anymore. So you got to get up higher than you can in a pickup truck. So that's the idea. In inspection, we're looking at mobile phone towers. That's sort of our first application that we're looking at. How do you climbing towers is one of the most dangerous professions in the country right now in terms of deaths per capita or deaths per worker. A lot of these people that are climbing these cell phone towers will climb. They're supposed to be tethered, but they're not strictly required to. And sometimes they have to climb around objects and they have to undo their tether and climb up. And some of these things are 1,000. You've probably seen the YouTube videos, right, of these climbers. They put the GoPro on their helmet and climb up, and I get my palms sweat just watching the YouTube video. It's really freaky. So, but these guys love it. They're adrenaline junkies. It's a really dangerous job. So the idea is that you could take one of these drones, these vertical takeoff and landing ones, and just climb the tower virtually and do an inspection, take a bunch of pictures, and then make a decision. Do you really want to climb that tower today or not? Is there an issue you have to go fix, or can you just do it visually? So that's really new for the mobile phone industry, and we're kind of Sentera, we're kind of proud we're a leader in that market. That was actually one of our founding product visions. Was when we started the company almost a year ago, we said, here's a new opportunity that nobody's addressing yet. Let's go after that. So we've developed a whole suite of solutions, including some specialized software that helps take pictures specifically of cell phone towers and how do you organize that. But large construction projects is the same idea. A lot of big firms are hiring folks in Cessnas or Pipers or something to fly over and take a photograph with a Nikon or Canon once a week, just as a status photograph. So you could do that type of thing with drones as well. Oil and gas and mining, obviously. Mining is interesting. One thing that you can do with a drone. I won't get too much into the specific technology, but because we can get into the weeds really quick. But you can take photographs of different angles of an object. Let's say an open pit mine or a big pile of material. And because you've got the GPS location of where every one of those pictures was taken, and some math about the lens and the curvature of the lens and all this stuff, you can do a whole bunch of fancy math and it's kind of like stereo vision, only from many different stereo points, and you can build a 3D map, a really accurate 3D model of either that open pit mine or that pile of debris or whatever it is, and you can measure it very accurately, and you can do that quickly. In a 15-minute flight, you download it, process that information, and almost right away, you've got an answer that you used to have to hire a survey crew, and they'd spend a whole day doing. So, or maybe a week sometimes. or months. So, okay, agriculture, same idea. I talked about that a little bit, but quick crop scouting, getting an aerial view, and then you can take this and you can send those pictures right to your mobile device. So a crop scout might go out, fly the field, and instead of getting on the cell phone and calling and saying that your field that's west of County Road, whatever, is all washed out because of the rain, like today, right? He just texted him a photograph that he just got from the drone. A little bit more about agriculture. So this is what, it doesn't look like much, but this is one of the cameras we designed. It's got two different cameras on board. One's a normal camera and one's a infrared camera. And you might fly over a field, and this is what, from really high altitude, a cornfield might look like. It doesn't look like much. To a farmer, it does. They see a lot of things going on there. But this is what that same field looks like in infrared light, where the human eye can't see. And you start to see some splotches in areas that you don't really see in this picture. So that starts to give you another layer of information. You know, what's going on with those splotches. It turns out that those are areas where there's some stress, either due to moisture or maybe there's some other issue, or lack of moisture. Then you can run, you can take it a step further and actually compare different photographs that are taken in different wavelengths of light, run them through some specialized algorithms, basically some software that compares all those different wavelengths of light and builds false color imagery where you can say, okay, green, like here's a green red, so green areas are healthy, red areas are stressed. And this is the type of thing you could, this might be a 40-acre field, what this image is, so a big area. So you can hand that to the farmer or grower, and they can decide what they're going to do, whether they'll go out and inspect these certain areas. Maybe they already know that that stuff in the corner is all junk anyway, and they're not worried about it, you know. So another thing with drones is that you can get down and you get real close-up imagery. So this is that same idea of taking, building a health map of a farm field. But here you can get down to and see almost the individual plant level, almost the individual leaf level, what leaves are healthy and which ones are not, and then color coded from a red to kind of green-blue scale. Cell phone tower inspection, talked about that. So this is a cell phone tower, a typical cell phone tower you might see anywhere with like a single kind of castellation around the top. And you can zoom in on these pictures because they're nice high-resolution images. And here you can inspect the wiring, make sure that the wiring is still intact. Or maybe lots of times what they're doing is they're doing an inspection after they've hired somebody to come do an installation, installing some new antennas or some new equipment. So they hire the company to do that, and then they have to send out another person to inspect that or to audit the work to make sure it was done right. So a lot of that you might be able to do just from a drone instead of sending a climber up to do that. They're sending climbers up right now with Nikon and Canons, you know, strapped to their shoulder, hanging off, dangling as they're climbing the tower, and then they get up with one hand and try to take pictures. So there's a lot of room for improvement. So remember those 15 million pictures we were talking about? So we've got a lot of experience with taking a lot of pictures and what you have to do. What are the problems you run into? So it can be overwhelming, the amount of data, amount of bulk imagery that you start collecting. And it turns out that 99% of that imagery that you might be collecting, they might not show any problems. You know, everything might be great. And in that case, that's good, but at least you've proven that it's great. But what do you do with that? Another thing we found is that data will easily die on data cards. So you got these little SD cards that you put in your cameras, and they might go collect a bunch of images, and then what? You know, the SD card gets put in their pocket or falls in the truck and somewhere, or they get back to the office and they put it on the desk, and it just piles up with all the other junk, and all that data was lost. Why did you go do that? You know, so the idea is that you can, you know, how do you make it easy to get the data off those data cards, archive it, and then make it easy to share? And so that's what we're doing from a software standpoint. Is we've built a tool, kind of a cloud engine is what we call it, but it'll take in data from drones. We have that at the bottom, but maybe other sources, whether it's smartphones or digital cameras or legacy data that they've got sitting on computers. Feed that all into one common database, and the idea of this database is that it stores all the pictures, automatically organizes them based on location and date. And the idea here is that all these, especially drones in particular, they've all got GPSs on board. Every time you take a picture, you know exactly where that picture was taken. You know a time that it was taken, and all that information is saved along with the picture. So when you get back to the office and you download all that, we just make sure that we download that other data also, and we marry it all up, and we just automatically archive. So when you get back to the office and take your data card out, or a lot of these now have got kind of Wi-Fi built in so that you do it all wirelessly, it just automatically populates all the pictures into the right location on the map, and we put little pins there. So all those green pins are different areas where there's a collection of images that the idea is to make this as hands-off as possible, so all the images just automatically go there. And then when somebody wants to go look at the historical data, they just click on one of those pins, up pops another window, and all the images are sorted by date, or they're put in automatic folders where here's a collection that was done on this date at this time. Here's another folder that's got, you know, that same cell phone tower, that same farm field on another day. So that's the idea. That's what Sentera is trying to do, and how we're trying to take this drone technology that we've been working on for 15 years, a lot of us, and how can we make it useful to industry? How can we make it useful to commercial users that want to find, you know, do something useful with the data that isn't just over the hill surveillance or that type of thing. So drones are kind of a hot topic right now. It's kind of fun to be working in the industry. It's going through another revolution. We did a revolution in the late 90s. I kind of got into it right after on the tail end of that, as it was throughout the 2000s. And now it's, I mean, every time I go to one of these things, or every time I talk to somebody new, you think you've heard of all the ideas, and somebody's always got some new idea or some new application. So it's really cool, and it's exciting. There's a lot of potential for economic benefit, and it's still early days. I mean, this is like the, you know, GeoCities or whatever, some early websites back in the mid 2000s, right? And think of what the web is now. That's where we are in the commercial side of the drone industry. So that's pretty much all I got. I'm happy to answer questions or talk about whatever else anybody wants to talk about. Yeah?
One question I have for you is, you and stuff. So Mr. Farmer hires you. Who owns that data?
That's a good question, and the farmers usually ask that too, because on farms in general, technology is becoming. I mean, most people have no clue how much technology exists on farms now. Just in the last 5 years, even farms are big high-tech industries, and there's lots of data being collected, and you know everybody's worried about who owns the data, whether it's pictures or whether it's data about seeds or whether it's data about which seed varieties perform good in certain soil types and all that type of stuff. So it's a hot topic for farmers and growers. Our standpoint is that, of course, the farmer owns the data of his or her own farm field, right? Especially if they own the equipment and they went and flew it, or they hired somebody to go fly it. That's their data. So we've got a software tool that helps them download all that information and organize it, but we let them keep it all locally. You know, we have a cloud service if they want to archive it on our cloud service, but that's still theirs. They own it, and in fact, there's a local copy of that they can choose to either delete or keep. So there are other companies in the industry who are getting into the agricultural imaging industry, and a lot of those are getting a lot of investment money. And I can tell you that the reason they're getting a lot of investment money is because they're going in with a big data play, and they're going to try to own the data and aggregate the data. And it's an interesting strategy, and it might have tons of potential. I mean, that might be the $100 billion idea that somebody comes up with. But Sentera, we're trying to be a little bit more local, a little bit more organic. Say, you own your data. You know, this is going to evolve. We don't need to try to take over the universe today. So, I don't know. Yeah.
As part of your business model for Sentera, so you're in Minneapolis and there's other people like in Duluth, okay?
Yeah.
You might have a drone. Are you going to send your own people up there to do the drone photography, or are you going to have people like you're sending the data collection down to you and you do your thing?
So we're a technology company. We develop products, and so we're not a services company. We do some services depending on the customer or if it's required, but really we're trying to sell our products to others that want to go do the service. So other companies that might want to operate the drones, they would go out. If it's for farmers, they would offer it as a service, or maybe it's the farmers themselves, hiring their own folks to operate. But we're not doing a fly for service business right at this time. Is that what you're kind of getting at? So then I guess on the data processing side, we're building software tools, or there's third-party software tools that are when you download all the pictures off the drone that we can help you feed all the images into, that will do the analysis, whether it's crop analytics or other things, or whether you're trying to do for infrastructure inspection. Sometimes they're doing measurements, volumetric measurements of mines or construction sites where you're moving earth around. So we don't do that analysis. There's other tools out there, or there's other companies that already do that, and so we're just providing another tool set for them to be able to do that job.
So in terms of data management, you're providing a service for data management, not necessarily analysis.
Yeah, I mean, we have a software product that and so in some ways it's a service, but it's really it's a desktop application. So it runs locally on your machine. It would run on your computer in your office. So in that sense, we're selling you a product. There's a cloud service if you want that we offer. You can back it up, but you could also back it up to iCloud or Apple, or give it to whoever. We don't. However you do your online backups. We have one that's integrated with the tool, so it's not, you don't have to click a button; it just automatically does it. But yeah, we're not doing the services. We're selling the software as a product, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
My question is mechanical. You fly your quad for 15 minutes and the battery runs out.
Yeah.
You land it. You have another, like a pack of batteries that you snap into it.
Yep. You probably have 3 or 4 batteries with you.
Are they temperature sensitive?
So they're just like your cell phone battery or a laptop battery, just a little bit bigger. So if it's sitting out, if it's middle of winter here in Duluth and it's sitting in your truck overnight, it'll work, but it won't work very good. You might get 5 to 10 minutes of flight time out of it. So typically battery management is actually an issue. So you'd bring those batteries inside, you'd charge them up overnight, you'd haul them out to your truck, you let your truck warm up for a couple minutes, and then you'd haul them out to the truck, and so they try to keep them warm and they work better. I mean, if that's kind of what you're getting at, but yeah.
This would be a dumb question. How do you land the airplane version?
Yeah, it crash lands every time. So so again, they're autonomous, right? They've got GPS on board. They fly themselves. So you plan a route, and in fact, if you're doing a farm field, you just draw a box around the farm field, and it figures out, depending on your altitude and how much overlap you want between the pictures, it automatically figures out the lawnmower pattern to fly, and it won't let you take off unless you've programmed in a landing spot. And the idea is, and it's a big issue actually with these things with lost link procedures. So what happens if and when you lose your data link or control? Well, it's got an autopilot on board. It's got a GPS. It knows, so it's got a timer on board. It waits. In this case, it waits 20 seconds. If it hasn't regained control after 20 seconds, it says, "Okay, I'm just going to fly home." Flies home, comes in, and lands. So the idea is that you would, it's up to you, but you would not have programmed in that landing spot in a bad spot. Hopefully, otherwise it's going to land there. But
Well, on the Phantom 3s, it goes, if your drone is up there and it goes beyond the tree line, you say, I don't know where that thing is. And it's true that you can let go of the control sticks and it'll hover, but you have a button on it you can push and it'll come home.
yep, same idea. Yeah, and
It'll come home
that's
the same way it got there. It won't fly and hit a tree. I mean, obviously it got there safe.
Yep.
It'll fly back safe.
at that safe altitude. So this is what makes a drone versus an RC airplane, right? The idea that the technology with GPS, autopilots, other sensors, it's gotten to the point where the autonomy is there. It's smart enough to be able to do that on its own without some skilled thumbs on some joysticks. So. Nobody's talked about regulations, which is interesting, but so yeah, go ahead.
The sensors that you make, those are the green things in the
Yeah.
box up there.
Mhm.
You make them to attach to consumer drones.
Yeah, all the drones that we sell. So, and that's a good point. So there's only one consumer drone that we're selling, and actually, this is more of a prosumer drone. You think of the camera industry, Canon and Nikon and Olympus, they've got prosumer lines of photographic equipment, and that's kind of what this is. It's $1,500. It does a lot, but somebody who's going to do serious work is going to probably buy a more capable, more expensive model. But we designed our cameras so they can be carried on this because this is a great entry level. This is a great place to start. You get one of these, it's really easy to use, and we give you a capability on how to go. Yeah, you can go to the family picnic and get some cool pictures at the park or something like that. But if you want to use it for a job, we put our special cameras on board.
And do the sensors mount to the gimbal that?
Sometimes they do, and some of them for aerial mapping, you don't care about the gimbal so much. You're just looking straight down, so we just mount it straight down. So.
With regard to regulations, how long does it take to get the exemption from 333 to?
So we it took us 6 months, but they're supposed to happen in less than 3 months. But the FAA is like really.
Process about $3,500.
So okay, so here's the way it works right now. If you want to get an authorization from the FAA to fly, you go through this process. It's called anyway. You file an application, and they've got a defined process for that. And some people are getting their applications approved in like 2 weeks. Us, it took 6 months because we had a bunch of special stuff, and we tried to do like 4 or 5 different drones all at once. So it was a big package deal. And once you get approved, there's a whole bunch of stipulations that the FAA puts on you. One of them is that you need to have a pilot's license of some sort at the moment. That's going to change next year. There's these proposed rules coming out where the FAA is going to give you authorization to fly with what they're going to call a small UAS operator, or small unmanned aircraft operator's license, which is going to be a little bit, that'll be a lot easier, and it's going to be going online, taking a test that shows you've studied some booklet that you bought for $40, and that test might have a fee the idea is they're saying that they think it's going to cost maybe a couple $100, and just the whole process. That's their goal. So they want the barrier to entry to be low, but the idea is if you're going to be flying these or operating these for professionally or for commercial service, they want there to be some way to register and some way to prove that you know that you can't go fly within 3 miles of an airport or something like that is the idea, which is what the rules are right now. So.
But you can fly them in a downtown situation.
Sometimes,
Downtown?
yeah, sometimes, but usually, but a lot of that stuff's actually pretty restricted at the moment. So you might by the FAA, yeah.
Even though there's no airport around it.
Right, so it depends. It's one of those things where it depends. If you're working on a job site or a construction site, probably yes, you can. And the idea is, do you have control of the area? Is everybody who is in the area of the airspace that you're going to be flying and the ground below it, are they part of the operation? It's kind of quote unquote.
If you guys flying in downtown Spur Street,
Yeah,
that wouldn't be a bad idea.
right. So
We'll hear about it.
It's a year ago there was no process, and the FAA just said, hey, we don't want you doing that, and everybody was just going and doing it anyway. So the idea is that just over the past 9 months, they've put a process in place, and that process is improving as they go. So that's the positive news. All right, Craig, is there anything else you want? Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd. That was an awesome presentation. And so we can spend some time here if you want to stick around and talk to a couple people, or feel free to take off. I do want to thank everyone for taking their time to come here today. We're going to be having an exciting event like this each month, and like I said, this is what I love to do. And if those that do know me closely know that I am more than happy to meet any day of the week, and shoot me an email, give me a business card, and I'm happy to connect you up and give you some more information, or just learn more about Club E. But thanks again, Todd, and thanks, Rick, for coming up from Minneapolis and doing this, and feel free to do a little bit of mingling. Thank you.